rising now to daring, dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, it's only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. Greet the rising sun. Some people think to harvest happiness by weeding troubles, easing every stress. The trouble is that troubles never end. Get rid of one, and you face its friend. And you face its friend. It's in your heart. The songs of joy resound. You'll hear but echoes in the world around. Wind on a hill sounds lonely if you're sad, free if you're free, cheerful if you're glad. Cheerful if you're glad. Friends, come with me. We'll chant of battles won, shots not of anger. Joy will be our God. Before the light, the veils of sorrow rend. In inner freedom, all delusions end. All delusions end. Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere. Love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar. It can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Thank you, friends. wonderful singers. Swami Kriyananda almost always started his programs with music because the singing and the energy of the songs, the words of the songs, but especially the melody opens the heart. So Devi and I are, as you know by now, we're launching this book, Touch of Peace, tonight. This is the fourth in a series of books, which are compilations of our blogs. And tonight, each of us will read two blogs and comment on them. So it isn't just reading from the book, but uh, using that as an entree into talking about the subject that we have written about. And then we've got a number of questions that we'll be happy to do our best to try to answer.
And thank you for joining us wherever you are for this virtual book launch of Touch of Peace. And I just want to share a little bit about how these blogs are written, um, because we want to thank all of you who get the blogs weekly and who comment or simply read and appreciate them, because you are very much a part of the process of the creation of these blogs. When we begin writing, and as you may know, Jyotish and I alternate, uh, each writing one a week, um, or each writing one every other week. And when we do that, we try to feel you. What do you need to hear to get through your day, to get through your week, to help you spiritually? And so we really write them in collaboration with you, and we thank you all for your interest and appreciation of the blogs. And if you've just started receiving them, there are 3 back books available: Touch of Light, Touch of Joy, Touch of Love, and now this latest one, Touch of Peace. So we'll be sharing with you now, and we hope, and then we'll be having more music in the end after our questions. So we just want this to be a fun, enjoyable time together. So Jyotish will start with his first blog.
I'll start. This is in the tradition of Swami Kriyananda. He, I would say, the most common kind of satsang that he did in an informal sense. He taught many classes, but I'm talking more about just sharing with friends the way we are tonight. Generally, that would be about something that he had just written. Often he would be working on a book and he would finish a chapter or two, and he would invite the community to come over, and in his living room, he would read what he had just finished writing and ask for comments on it. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful time together. And it was informal, it was often humorous, it was just friends sharing with friends. And that's what we want tonight to be. So I'll start by reading one of my blogs from Touch of Peace. This is Till Only Love Remains. I had an interesting dream last week. In the beginning, a group of us, friends and gurubhais, were strolling in a crowded street with many people milling around. Then, in front of us, there was a commotion, and we saw a military type vehicle backing up towards us. With all the people around me, I was unable to get out of the way and was struck by the jeep and dragged underneath it. The scene then shifted to some months or years later. I was among a group of people looking at an odd fellow, obviously a homeless street person. He had a little encampment in a woody area near the street with a collection of odds and ends and a small tarp to keep out the sun and rain. The fellow himself was unkempt, with long matted hair, a beard, and raggedy clothes. But he seemed happy, and he was surrounded by birds and animals. He was sharing the little food he had and was petting and helping them. The viewers were amazed and a little frightened to see an injured mountain lion beside him being petted and soothed. Dozens of birds were chirping happily and landing not only near him, but on him, obviously comfortable in his presence. Finally, a shy little snake slithered out of a hole and onto his lap, wanting to be petted. Passerbys were either bemused by the odd scene or angry and mocking him, but he seemed oblivious to them and their criticism. He was clearly quite content to be sitting under a tree with his animal friends. Suddenly, this strange fellow remembered who he was and started laughing and laughing. It was one of those laughs that went on until tears streamed down your face. The laughter was joyful and infectious, and all the onlookers started laughing too. I suddenly realized that this stranger was me and that I had just awakened from amnesia caused by the accident. As I recollected the dream to Devi the next morning, I was surprised to find myself choking up with emotion. Only then did I realize its spiritual significance. From the perspective of our soul, we all have spiritual amnesia. We are all lost and homeless, surrounded by a few raggedy possessions, and doing the best we can to get by. I was also touched, remembering the animals in the dream. Let this be my wish. If sometime in my future I get amnesia, if my name, possessions, occupation, and very identity are all stripped away, then, like the character in my dream, let only love remain. And when I wake from my amnesia, let there be blissful laughter that touches and awakens joy in everyone. In gratitude, Nayaswami Jyotish. So this was, I've come to recognize this was a semi-superconscious dream. I mean, this is probably nearly 2 years later. And I can still remember details in the dream. I remember the hillside that he was sitting on and the kind of trees that he was under. It was kind of a madrone tree or something where the bark was irregular and some of it kind of hanging in a little bit of shreds. And I remember the encampment. It isn't, the details aren't important, but the fact that I can remember a dream in such detail that far after the dream itself means that it was had more energy. The difference between a superconscious dream and a subconscious dream is the amount of energy that's in it and the centeredness of the consciousness. You know, Master said something very interesting about dreams. He said that obviously, many of us remember our dreams. But when you have a dream, even though the imagery may be quite bizarre in it and doesn't quite follow the laws of logic as we know them in our daily life, shifting of scenes as in this and odd things happening. Nonetheless, the images in the dream are really quite clear. Far more clear than when we're trying to meditate and we're trying to, let's say, imagine or visualize the face of a master, a face of Yogananda. In a dream, I've had a few dreams of Yogananda, and he's there in startling clarity in the dream. When I try to visualize him in meditation, he's there, but it isn't with that same clarity. So Master pointed out what's the difference. In the dream state, our energy has completely withdrawn from the periphery of our body, and it is located in the brain. Therefore, the brain is energized, and the activity that's going on in the brain is also energized. And so that's why dreams are clear. We're looking in the same spot when we dream. It's basically the same spot where we would see a vision in meditation. But the dream is clear, the visualization, unless you have an actual visualization, true one. But when you're trying to imagine or clearly see a master, it isn't that same clarity. You understand what I'm talking about. It all has to do with how much energy there is in the brain. And so the whole secret of meditation is to withdraw that energy and to bring it up the spine into the brain. And if we can get the energy sufficiently withdrawn and brought into the brain, then our visualization or our realization will take on the same clarity. And the difference between a subconscious dream and a superconscious dream is that the superconscious dream has more energy withdrawn and more energy in the brain. And therefore, it awakens us to our true self, the one that doesn't suffer from the amnesia that we all suffer from in daily life. And so it was a very interesting dream, and also a good way to share some of these thoughts in this blog. And now Devi will share one of her blogs.
We have a very wonderful technical crew who's making all this work. So thank you for that. You know, I also want to comment before I start reading the blog that I've chosen from Touch of Peace. Each of these books represents 2 years of our blogs. And so the very first one in this book is, it would be January 2019. And as you may remember, it was March 2020 that the pandemic really hit in force in the United States. It had been elsewhere before. And so unlike the other books where we just wrote from inspiration, the blogs in this book very often are trying to give you tools. How do we get through these times? We're all challenged. We're all feeling anxious, isolated, lonely, stressed out, all of these things. Well, what tools has Master given us to help us deal with this? And so that's why we called the book Touch of Peace, because we were trying to just, both for ourselves and for the readers, give them peace, give them tools to find peace in these difficult times. So this one that I'm going to read is from April 11th, 2019. We're just getting interesting. It's called Through Your Eyes Only. Paramahansa Yogananda would sometimes gaze lovingly at his disciples and say, "If you only knew how beautiful you are, I see you all as beings of light." It's often challenging to see the best in the world around us, faced as we are with life's many contrasts, beauty and ugliness, wisdom and folly, integrity and dishonesty, kindness and cruelty, to name but a few. Yet striving to see other people in their highest light helps them as well as us. I've read many stories about young gang members or hardened criminals who were able to turn their lives around because one person saw the goodness in them. They changed because someone saw them as God sees them. I've taken up the practice of inwardly asking, when I see something or someone that evokes a negative reaction in me, like judgment or dislike. Master, how do you see this? When I imagine my guru looking at the world through my eyes, it's amazing how my perception of everything begins to change. The beautiful, positive things become brighter, clearer, more filled with light. The colors in nature become more intense. The new buds on a tree branch seem bursting with life. The radiant soul nature shines forth from people's eyes. On the other hand, there's also in this world a great deal of evil that confronts us. If we try to see it through God's eyes, then even the darkness takes on a purpose and meaning in the greater scheme of things. Anxiety about the future is replaced by calm understanding that this is God's world and He is in charge. There is a beautiful story from the life of the beloved Christian saint Francis of Assisi. He was born in 1182, the son of a wealthy merchant in Assisi, Italy. In his youth, he had a spiritual conversion, which ultimately led to a vision of Christ, who asked him to rebuild his church. Francis spent the remainder of his life as a humble wandering beggar, but so great was his sanctity that thousands became converted to a life in God. His spiritual impact continues to this day. One day, as St. Francis was traveling through the countryside, he saw a leper approaching him along the road. Leprosy was something that still evoked revulsion in Francis, and this leper had most of his face eaten away by the terrible disease. Every instinct in Francis told him to turn and run away, lest he himself become infected. But he controlled this impulse and tried to see the leper as God saw him. With this changed perception, Francis ran up to him and embraced him and kissed him on his disease-ravaged face. Immediately, the leper he held in his arms was transformed. Before Francis stood the living form of Jesus Christ. When we try to see the world through God's eyes, we are able to transcend our limited perspective, and our consciousness is lifted to a higher plane. Vision in God becomes vision of God, of His light and love everywhere. As Yoganandaji wrote, when my two eyes that behold both good and evil become single, and behold in everything only the divine goodness of God, I shall see that my body, mind, and soul have become filled with His omnipresent light. End quote. May God's vision become your own. Nayaswami Devi. So when Jyotish was sharing with his blog about the dream of the poor homeless beggar with all the animals around him, it reminded me so much of St. Francis. And because if those of you who know stories of his life, the birds would just land on him and he would preach to them, and the little creatures of the forest. There's a beautiful depiction in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. It's a fresco by Giotto, a great Italian artist, of Francis giving his first sermon to the birds because people wouldn't yet listen. And I also have to tell a story on myself when in Jyotish's story, when the little snake crawled up onto his lap and he was loving him. In the early days of Ananda, many of us lived in canvas teepees. That was all we had to put up at that time. And they don't really have doors. They just have little flaps, canvas flaps. And there was a little wild kitty that used to come. First, she was very shy, and then little by little, she'd come inside my teepee, and I'd put a little food for her. And then little by little, she would come while I was meditating in the morning and curl up on my lap. And so one morning I was meditating and I had my eyes closed and I think I had earplugs in, but I felt the little kitty come onto my lap, curl up, and I just kept meditating. And then finally, after some period of time, I could kind of feel her purring, you know how little kitties vibrate. So I opened my eyes and she looked up at me very lovingly, and she had brought me a present for breakfast, and it was a dead rat. And I had been sitting there meditating for about an hour with a dead rat on my lap. But anyway, I can't say I had the same reaction as Jyotish did in his dream or St. Francis. But nevertheless, we shall go on. But this thought of seeing the God in everyone. There's a beautiful video that we watched some years ago, a documentary called Doing Time, Doing Vipassana. Vipassana is a form of meditation. And it was a documentary, true story, of a new prison warden who had been appointed to the largest prison in the world, happens to be just outside of New Delhi, India, and thousands of prisoners. And one can imagine the horrible conditions, dirt, and anyway, one wouldn't want to be there if one had the choice. But the prison warden, she happened to be a woman, and she practiced Vipassana meditation. And she introduced it. She said, we're going to teach whoever wants to come. Nobody has to come, but we'll teach it this time in this little tent on the prison grounds. And at first, 2 or 3 people came because they were just bored of sitting in their cell, but they began doing it longer and longer each day, and more people came. First there were 2 or 3, then there were dozens, then there were hundreds, then there were thousands. And they cleaned up the whole prison. That was part of their, after meditating, and the prison was transformed. But there was one man in particular, a young man, and he had been a murderer. He had murdered many people. And he told his story. They interviewed him. And he said, I took the lives of many people, but I felt no remorse. It was like I had no connection with the suffering I was causing. And then when I began feeling God's presence in my life, began feeling how I was a part of him and that he saw me and he saw everything I had done and he still loved me. It was totally transforming. And I wrote a letter to the parents of one of the young men I had killed and robbed and killed, and just saying my deep regret and sorrow at what I had done. And those people came and visited him, the people whose son he had murdered. And not only did they do it once, but they began regularly and they formed a deep bond. He was never going to leave that prison, but they adopted him as their son. And he knew that someone saw him as God saw him. And even though I don't know what the rest of his story is, but presumably he's still in that prison. But nevertheless, even hardened criminals, even the worst of sinners, as it says in the Gita, speedily comes to me if he thinks of me. So it's our job in this world of duality, of dark and light, of folly and wisdom, all the things we see around us, to just see it through God's eyes, that it's all part of his dream, every part of it. It's not that we have to celebrate the evil, but we can accept it as part of a whole. And somehow by doing that, it neutralizes our reactive process. Like, oh, this is bad, I have to judge it, I don't want that. We just say, this is God sees this, and it's part of the whole. And it gives us the ability to find tranquility and peace, no matter what is going on around us. And then when we find those of us who live in Ananda communities are a part of a center. We're so fortunate to be able to have satsang with people who love God. We were sitting here watching the singers sing before we started speaking, and it was so beautiful to see the light of God in their eyes. It's easy to see that in people that are seeking God, but in the one that's been hurtful or hateful, to also in the leper to see God there. And if we can do that, then, as we said, vision in God becomes vision of God. And we realize that everything in this world is a part of God. So now Jyotish will do his next one.
Thank you, Devi. That is beautiful.
You're welcome.
Okay. So this is from May 22nd or May 31st. So now we're a little ways into the year of COVID as it was coming on. We're kind of much more used to it at this point. This is called sharing. Mother Teresa of Calcutta told this very touching story. The sisters from her order were visiting the very poor during a time of famine in Calcutta. To each home, they brought some desperately needed food, a bag of rice, some lentils, and a few other bare necessities. As one sister gave the food to a mother of several starving children, to the sister's surprise, the famished mother divided it in half, saying, "My neighbor's children are also starving, and I must share this with them." Mother Teresa went on to say, "I wasn't surprised that this woman might share, since I've seen this often among the poorest of the poor. What surprised me was that even during a time of starvation for her family, the woman was able to think of others. Caring about others during a time of personal difficulty is the hallmark of an expansive consciousness. In fact, Swami Kriyananda said that the ability to think of others first, even when you yourself are suffering, was his prime criterion for appointing someone as a light bearer or an acharya. He placed this quality above knowing the teachings or being able to explain them well. Sharing is not just a nice principle for devotees, it is vital for everyone wanting success and happiness, because sharing unleashes one of the most powerful forces in the universe, the law of abundance. That which you give to others will increase, that which you withhold will diminish. This spiritual law is often applied to money. At Ananda, we encourage people to donate and tithe, not only for the support of the work, but more importantly, for their own spiritual growth. There are many other ways also that Paramahansa Yogananda suggested we should share. He said, "Be a smile millionaire. Shoot everyone with the buckshot of your smiles. Everyone you know needs your goodwill. Even fortune cookies seem to know this basic truth. Last week we were given one at a restaurant that read, 'Be patient with everyone. They are all fighting their own battles.' We need to give to others if we hope to receive from them." Again, Yogananda taught us this highest prayer: "Mother, reveal thyself to me, that I may share thee with all." Share your spiritual aspirations with everyone you meet. No sermons are needed. Often, inspiration is shared best not by words, but by joy, beauty, laughter, or a simple touch. Swami Kriyananda had an aura of friendship surrounding him. That is why even strangers would open themselves to him. and some would weep when he left, though they had spent barely an hour with him. The divine, you see, expresses love most purely through friendship. And when we treat someone like a friend, we serve as a channel for Divine Mother's love. And as Yogananda often said, the channel is blessed by that which flows through it. Here's the biggest secret of all for unleashing the law of abundance. If you feel a lack of anything, money, smiles, inspiration, or friendship, it is because you aren't sharing it enough. Give away that which you want, and the universal law of karma will make sure it comes back to you 100-fold. That starving mother knew this truth intuitively. Let's all try to come up to her standard. In abundance, Nayaswami Jyotish. So this principle of sharing, one might say, is fundamental, one of the bedrock principles of Ananda, Swami Kriyananda, when he was he hadn't yet come onto this path. He had just finished reading the autobiography of a yogi, and he took virtually the next bus across the country in order to meet Yogananda. And so he was coming, and he was thinking during that trip that he had two strong wishes. One was to find God through these teachings, through the consciousness that he had read in Autobiography of a Yogi. And the other was, these teachings are so wonderful. They need to be shared with the whole world. And really, that's the fundamental mission of Ananda, the fundamental mission of the path that Yogananda brought, to find God. And all of us individually need to carry on our search. You know, we can help each other in many, many ways, but we can't do the work for each other any more than we can eat for someone else. Each of us has to do that on his own. And so finding God ultimately is an individual activity, but an activity where sharing it and being in a group of other people that help support us and we help support them, that makes the journey easier, and it makes it more fun. There's a very wonderful man in India. He's the head of Tata Motors. Unlike so many businessmen, he's very high-minded and does constant social work. Anyway, he said a very, very nice thing. We saw it on a billboard as we were driving through the streets of India, and it was Mr. Tata. It said, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk with others. Well, we have a long ways to go. And so not only walking with others, but sharing with them, helping them, giving them whatever we have, unleashes, as I said in this blog, the law of abundance. And that law of abundance will fill our ability to share. You know, we're not like a cup. The difference between a cup and the faucet is that you hold the cup up and it has a capacity. And so once the cup is filled up, that's all it can hold. And so when we're begging, we hold up our cup. Oh, give me this or give me that. I need this, I need that. It's a very typical mental thought of people. So we hold that cup up, and indeed, God generally will fill our cup, but it's so limited. The faucet that is filling that cup can keep running and running and rowing, it could potentially fill 1,000,000 of those cups. So let's be like the faucet and not the cup. Let's share whatever we have with others. And especially if you feel something is lacking or if you're going through a hard time, then share with others. One of the things that we'll talk about later when we answer some questions, someone asked about grief during of losing someone in COVID. We'll tell a story later. I don't want to tell it now. Devi's going to read another blog. But even in grief, if we share with others, we will transform not only their lives, but our own. So whatever you want, give it away. Whatever you need, share it with others, and it will come to you 100-fold.
Blog that we're going to share this evening, but I wanted to start when Jyotish and I teach together. We key off thoughts and inspiration, and when he mentioned Mr. Tata in India, who's the head of probably the largest industrial conglomerate in all of India. He's a very fine man, deeply spiritual, and very sharing, giving, creating hospitals and housing and so forth. But I'm reading a book now called Sometimes Brilliant by a man named Dr. Larry Brilliant, who is a direct disciple of the great saint named Curly Baba, who was also the guru of Baba Ram Das. And Neem Curly, Larry Brilliant was a young man. He came to India, kind of a hippie, and he had just graduated medical school, but he had never practiced. And he went to Neem Curly Baba's ashram. And after not very long, Neem Curly Baba said to him, "You will eradicate smallpox in India." And he just thought it was impossible. It was rampant there. It was epidemic. This was in the early 1970s. And almost like what you hear about India now during COVID, dead bodies just lined up on the streets and in railway stations. It's pretty horrible. And through miracle after miracle, this young man with no support was able to get the support of WHO, the UN, and in one of the industrial towns that were Tata Industries had a big complex, there was a lot of smallpox there, and it was spreading. And when Mr. Tata heard about that, the government of India then was run by Indira Gandhi. She was the prime minister, and she must have been a very unpleasant person. She would not give any support to this, but Mr. Tata said, and he gave millions to this campaign, which eventually was successful. But what the story I wanted to share about sharing was this Larry Brilliant, who was just a young, kind of, I don't know, enthusiastic American and not accepted by the powers that be in India at all. And he did something that really upset Indira Gandhi. And she called the head public health officer of India and said, "I want him evacuated or, forced to leave the country, quit India today, get him out of this country." And so this man who was the head of public health in all of India, he knew that he was doing a good job, this Dr. Brilliant. And he said to Indira Gandhi, everyone was afraid of her, he said, "Will you give me 72 hours before we give him a quit India certificate?" And she said, "Why?" And he said, "I want to adopt him as my son. And then you won't be able to force him to leave India." And that's what happened. So it's just like, You can imagine a high public official in America doing something like that. But when I was reading it today and then I read it aloud to Jyotish, it was so touching to me that people would be so generous of heart because he knew he was doing good and he knew he was helping people and he knew he was putting his own position in jeopardy by standing up against Indira Gandhi. Nevertheless, let's go on. Okay, so this one that we're going to read, the final one, is it's number 77, June 19th, 2020. And it's called, What Can We Do? A revolution against racism and social injustice is upon us. Like the slow rise of water behind a dam, this revolution has been building for a long time. Finally, one drop too many fell on the rising water, the death of George Floyd while in police custody. This released the flood of global conscience, which is sweeping away the long-standing barricades of racial injustice. As well as outer events, there are unseen currents that direct human destiny, the influence of God and of self-realized masters. That influence, subtle though it may be, changes the course of world events much more than we realize. This is important to remember during the times in which we live. In part, this impact works through the law of karma. Painfully or joyfully, karma teaches individuals and nations the lesson, as you sow, so shall you reap. Over time, we come to realize that when we bring suffering to others, we ourselves suffer. By contrast, when we help others to achieve well-being, we find happiness for ourselves. In this way, the evolution of human consciousness takes place through the operation of higher laws. Techniques of meditation that the masters have brought also aid in uplifting humanity. The soul power awakened through God communion is invincible, greater than weapons, armies, or political control. Mahatma Gandhi used this soul force to free India from British rule and to diminish the racism that has long been a blight on the caste system. In 1918, he started the Satyagraha movement based on nonviolence and non-cooperation with foreign rule. For the next 30 years, until the British withdrew from India in 1947, Gandhi and his followers used soul power to break the chains of colonial dominance. Yoganandaji spoke very highly of Gandhi, both as a man of God and as a leader. He made it a point to visit Gandhi during his return trip to India in 1935 and initiated him into Kriya Yoga. Martin Luther King Jr., who led the civil rights movement from its beginning in 1955, was greatly influenced by Gandhi's methods. Reverend King said that the Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence was, quote, the only morally and practically sound method open to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom, end quote. Knowing that humiliations and dangers lay ahead for his, quote, freedom fighters, King trained them to maintain their dignity and inward centeredness in spite of demeaning, brutal treatment. With deep faith in God, King's followers drew upon their soul strength to overcome oppression and hatred. Now we are at a moment in time when, consciously or not, we are being propelled forward by forces of social change. What can we do to add our energy to the wave of transformation? Protests serve to bring racial injustices to public awareness and to awaken the demand for social change. Voting for ethical, honest leaders who work for the welfare of all also plays a vital role. But those who believe in a just God, a large portion of humanity, need to awaken the soul force within them. Now is the time to make use of his gift of meditation brought to us by enlightened teachers. meditate, live in truth, share higher consciousness with all whom you meet, and use the immense power of prayer to bring about the needed changes. Are you or others you know struggling with a sense of frustration or hopelessness as you confront the daunting challenge of effecting change in the world? If so, and if you haven't yet learned to meditate, begin today. Make it a daily habit to awaken your own inner strength. Ananda offers a vast array of free online classes, guided meditation, inspiration, and personal instruction to help you get started or to go deeper in your meditation. The world is changing now, and according to the masters, it will be for the better. If we look past the turmoil and uncertainty of these times, there are many signs, hopeful signs for the future. People are beginning to realize how better to relate to the environment, government, and one another. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we hear a lot about herd immunity. The idea is that if enough people, 80% of the population, develop immunity either through a vaccine or by recovering from the disease, the virus won't be able to affect us. Similarly, if enough people awaken their soul power through meditation and God communion, humanity may develop herd immunity from racism, hatred, and injustice. There is so much we can do and so much reason for hope for positive changes in society. Let us join our soul strength with God and with one another in this effort, with hope for a better world. Nayaswami Devi. Well, we're not through it yet, are we? It's still around us, but God has planted something in the heart of all humanity, and that's the soul power. And we may be sleeping and unaware of it. We may be just beginning to wake up to its potential within us. But nevertheless, it's there. And that's why it's so important to associate with others who share your beliefs and your values and your goals. You know, they say in India that second only to the blessing of having a true guru is satsang, association, fellowship with other truth seekers. And so I urge you, in whatever way you can, if there aren't other devotees around you, then Ananda offers so many virtual opportunities to have satsang, to listen to our music through Radio Ananda and videos and audios and so forth, through our wonderful classes that we offer through online. But all of these are our service to God and Guru and to you. But the important thing is for each one of us to take responsibility, as Gandhi put it, become the change you want to see in the world. And if you can live in that light, in that truth, in that power, soul power, then the world around us begins to change. We saw this, Jyotish spoke of Swami Kriyananda, who is our lifelong teacher. And watching him transform lives was the greatest gift, second to a true guru and satsang. But watching how he humbly, subtly, from behind the scenes, brought out that soul awareness in people. It gave you faith that it was there, that we can all find God. And sometimes we get discouraged, don't we, in our spiritual search. We think, oh, I've been trying for months or years or decades, and I still haven't found God. But I find comfort in the thought, God, even if you never come to me, I'm never leaving you. I will cling, Master said, be like the divine leech that, though torn to shreds, never lets go. And so don't look at what God's giving you. Look at your enduring commitment to bring your soul in attunement with the great consciousness of our masters and be committed to it. And if we can make that commitment, I will never give up. I will never give up. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. I don't even like to think, well, at the end, everything I want will come. That's still looking for something that you're going to get. You just say, God, what I'm finding comfort in is just to say, God, I will never leave you. Even if you don't drop a crumb on my plate, I don't care. My love for you is not dependent on what I receive, but I love you only because that's what I was born to do. So if we can live this way, we can help bring changes in the world. So now we're going to answer questions. And I think Jyotish and I will both come on the camera. And then Jyotish will start reading the first question that we received from Narayan. These are questions submitted by members of the Greater LA spiritual community.
So we'll try to make these answers practical rather than overly philosophical. Maybe you've had enough philosophy for tonight. Now let's get down to the nubbins of it. 1, what practical tips would you advise for remaining even-minded and cheerful? Well, the most important thing is meditation, because meditation, among other things, it centers the energy and draws the energy up from the heart center, especially when there's devotion in our meditation. It draws it from the heart center. That devotional energy rises up. And if we pray to God or look into the spiritual eye, the point between the eyebrows, that rising energy, think of the heart as the reactive mechanism in the body. I'm not talking about the physical heart, although the physical heart plays a very strong role in it too. I'm talking about the Anahata chakra, the chakra there. But they found that the physical heart, if you monitor that, often it will react to something. The nerves in the heart, physical heart I'm talking about, will react to something before the mind is cognizant. So it will have a positive reaction or a negative reaction, and then the mind finally catches up a little while later and says, "Oh, well, that's why I'm upset because of this or whatever." But so what we're trying to do here is to use the energy of meditation to learn to control the direction of the flow of life force in an upward direction. And as we do that, it interiorizes and moves that life force upward. Now, coming back to this, remaining even-minded and cheerful, the cheerful part is easy to see when the upward movement is flowing, then our mood is lighter. That's why Swami Kriyananda used to point out that, in fact, even our posture is important. He said, you always see saints either with their eyes lifted up or their head lifted up, looking in an upward direction. He says, you never see someone looking up like this saying, I feel so awful. I feel so blue. And you never see somebody like this slumped, looking down saying, I feel wonderful. I feel so uplifted. So our physical body expresses that also. So coming back to being even-minded and cheerful, first of all, understand that it has most to do with getting your energy flowing in a positive way. Now, obviously, life gives us lots of things to react to, many, many times a day. So practice with the little things that are maybe mildly irritating. a dripping faucet. You don't have to get mad at the faucet. Just practice being even-minded and cheerful and just turning the tap off. So those little things, if we practice and consciously, and sometimes we have to force ourselves to consciously say, if we catch ourselves reacting in a negative way, especially because that's the stronger reactions. If we find ourselves doing that, just say, no, I don't need to do that. I'm going to be even-minded and cheerful. And we can train ourselves to do that. Training yourselves in little ways leads to training yourselves in bigger ways. And then finally, training yourselves in very large ways so that basically nothing can get under your skin. Nothing can get your goat. There's and I'll end with this, Master's, he said his second most advanced disciple was Oliver Black. He started a work in Michigan, was very highly advanced. So I went there with Swami Kriyananda to his community, Song of the Morning Ranch, and met him. But we heard this story that at one time, he said he always surrounded himself with a bubble of joy, and he never let anything get into that bubble. And a friend of ours who was with him during for many years told me this story. He said that there was an incident where their temple burned down, and it was a big loss. And Oliver Black, Acharya Black, withdrew and went home. And he came back at dinner time several hours later. And it was as if nothing at all had happened, just cheerful and happy and sharing as always. And somebody asked him, well, why did you withdraw and what? He said, for a little while, for a few hours, I allowed that incident to burst my bubble of joy. But then I decided that my bubble of joy was more important than any temple, and now it's back in full glory. So we can have a bubble of joy or a bubble of calmness, cheerful, being calm and cheerful, even-minded and cheerful. We can create that bubble around us and then strengthen it with little acts until it becomes powerful and nobody can break it.
I'll just add a few little thoughts to that because we want to be able to get through our questions. We won't answer them. We'll try to give briefer answers. But Master's foremost woman disciple, Sister Gyanamata, said, your religion is tested in the cold light of day. And so how to remain even-minded? How is your religion tested? Just Jyotish spoke of the power of meditation. And why does that help us? Because it creates a magnetic flow from the lower chakras, which have to do with security issues and power issues, and even from the heart. The negative aspect of the heart chakra is the emotions and negative reactions. But if we train all that energy to be going upward to positive heart quality, expansion, calmness, and divine expansion and awareness, then when we see the world very, very differently. So meditation is one thing. Breathing exercises, I have found when I'm in a crisis, something's happened and I'm upset, just to pull back and do some regular breathing, inhaling a certain count, holding a certain count, same count, exhaling a certain count. It really calms the nerves. It calms your reaction. It creates that subtle barrier, that bubble of peace, so that you don't feel like you're right in there in the midst of it, but you're detached. And one final thought is, if something happens, you don't have to think, why me, why me? I remember I had two very good friends who were quite different. And one of them, we were in high school, she had to have some repeated surgery. It was very difficult. And we went to visit her, this other friend and I went to visit her. This other friend was quite a spiritual person. And the friend in the hospital was saying, "Why me? Why is this happening to me?" And my friend said very calmly and kindly, "Why not you?" And it was not what she wanted to hear, but it was based on that principle of don't identify with it. It's happening. It doesn't have to be you. So those are some practical things about how to remain even-minded and cheerful. This was the question that Jyotish referred to. For people that have lost loved ones from the pandemic, how can we best work through grief? Well, this is one of life's great challenges, isn't it? Whether you lose them through the pandemic or through other illnesses or just accident, whatever it might be. But I think, again, we come back to try to feel the soul connection. You know, when Ananda was struck by a forest fire, uh, threatened many times, struck once, 1976, and we lost everything we had. Our house burned to the ground. We lost all of our possessions. And for a few days afterwards, I was really in a state of shock. I just was totally disorganized. It sometimes happens when we lose a loved one. And then I thought, okay, I got to get control here. And I just went off by myself for a while. And I thought of every single thing I could remember, every plant, every fork, every blanket, every pair of shoes that I could remember that had been in that house. And I thought, well, where is it now? Oh, it's with God. Okay, God's got it. And I released it. And one by one, I released every single thing that we lost. And at the end of that time, I was fine. And I was really ready to move on. I didn't ever look back again. So when you lose a loved one, where are they? They're with God now. Release them. Let them enjoy the freedom that their soul has found. Don't hold them, because they feel our grief, they feel our sadness, and their souls, and it binds them. And so just release them, be free, know that they're free now, and that, as Sri Yukteswar speaks of in Autobiography of a Yogi, in the astral world we meet all of our lost loved ones, and it's a great, great reunion. So you'll see them again. And just be grateful for the time you had, and release them from your own attachment. Release that into offering them with gratitude to God.
As I was saying in my last blog when I read it, that what we give away, we grow in. So with grief, try to help others who are grieving. We had a remarkable example of this. A friend in India lost a son to leukemia and a father to COVID within a 2-week stretch. And naturally, he was deeply stricken with grief, but he knew better than to dwell in that. And so
He was a Kriyaban.
yeah, Kriyaban. And during that time, Ananda had a 24-hour hotline where if somebody lost a loved one or was grieving because of illness in the family, they could call that. And he asked to be a volunteer to answer those calls. And he did that for a month or 6 weeks until the need had passed. But help others. That's the best way. Next question. It's hard to turn on the news today without a story that is depressing, fear-inducing, or enraging. How do we stay informed about worldly events and not get sucked into negativity? Well, the first thing is to understand that the news that we get today is about 5% news and 95% opinion. And it is absolutely designed in order to make you feel enraged or negative or fearful. Because when you have that reaction, you tend to return again to get the next bit of news, because when you're afraid of something, especially, then that fear induces you to try to gain control. Well, the news stories know this. In fact, studies have shown that there is an actual inverse relationship to news reporting and the truth of the facts. As airplane deaths went down from like 1990 to 2005, they had airline deaths had reduced to be a tenth of what they were at the beginning of that period. News reporting of deaths doubled during that period of time. But they had less to work with, so they had to pump it up. So understand that the news you get is purposely done in order to be addictive to you. Now, this is something that's very important. I want to really emphasize this. Very, very important. When we have anxiety about something, COVID or things in the news, we think that more information is going to help. It's actually going to hurt. Because take COVID. We can never know all of the facts about COVID. And so the tendency is to, oh, I've got to study this. I've got to find out about this. Oh, I've got to find out what the death rate in Pennsylvania is now. Oh, I've got to, and the more we do that, the more anxiety we have. And so, in fact, the following of the news creates more anxiety. So, excuse me. I have a little frog in my throat. I wish he would jump out. So, what to do? We want to stay somewhat informed. You know, if it's big enough, you're going to hear about it, whether you're following the news or not. But if it's really important, you're going to hear. But I would say, as Master said, go on a worry fast. Maybe at least if you can't go on a news fast, go on a news diet. Check the news once a day and leave it at that, and then be done with it. Because finding out the very latest of everything is not going to help. So Devi will take the next one.
Okay. I think we can all relate to this one. I'm so restless when I meditate. Please help. Yeah. Well, that's the challenge of meditation. You know, we can calm our bodies. Maybe we do some yoga postures and stretching. We can maybe calm our breath up through some pranayama, but the mind, the restless mind, the monkey mind, as they say. And little by little, we gain control of it. It's not something that happens for most people right away, but little by little, if you persevere, if you're regular in your practice of meditation, maybe you have a busy life, but even a little bit, but every day, morning and evening, Master said, morning and evening, meditate. And little by little, you start enjoying. First, you begin tasting the calmness, then you begin enjoying it, then you begin to be able to control it little by little, not all the time. I mean, even deep meditators, you know, Master said in, I believe maybe it was a talk or autobiography, where he said he began thinking early on in his mission, he began thinking so much about creating world brotherhood communities that his mind went away from him and he forgot about God. And so even a master, that happens to in his enthusiasm. But perseverance, commitment, dedication, meditating with others, tremendously helpful. Try to meditate on your own, alone all the time. It's difficult. meditate with other people. Maybe they're a little more experienced in meditation. You'll tune in. It's like maybe you don't have such a good voice yourself, singing voice, but if you sing with others, you get in tune and you're able to sing better. So meditate with others, and then don't get frustrated. Just keep trying. And even if if your meditation, sometimes I know I'll just say, Master, that was really a pathetic meditation, but I still offer it to you. Just keep offering it to God. Keep offering your thoughts to God. And little by little, you will find that the restless mind begins to be calmed.
I'll just add, in the midst of meditation, when the mind is restless, give it something to focus on. The breath, singing inwardly a song, listening to the sound of Om, looking into the light. But you need something to focus the mind on, or it is going to just stay restless. Okay, what is the secret to working in harmony with others? I'll be very brief with this. Try to see the world as well as from your own viewpoint, from their viewpoint also, and accept that there can be differences and still there can be harmony. Look for the common ground, not for the differences. And if you look for the common ground, and especially if you prioritize harmony over being right, it'll be a great help to working in harmony.
How to keep my aura and myself and my being safe and protected from the disharmonious energy of others when whether directed toward me or not. The deeper I go in my own practice, the more sensitive I feel, and the more things around me I don't want to feel. Well, that's true. You do become more sensitive to people's thoughts and energy and feelings. How do you protect yourself from that? Try to keep your mind as much as you can focused at the spiritual eye. Try to be inwardly chanting. If you're in a specific situation where you feel people are directing negative things towards you, Master Swamiji taught us this movement where you just circle light around you, Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat, touching in front and behind. Om Tat Sat creates an aura of light. But try to live in the remembrance of God. And when negative energy comes to you, you don't push it away, but don't accept it. Detach yourself from it. It doesn't have to affect you if you don't let it. And we all have moments, situations where we're confronted with negative energy. When that happens, when you see it coming, if you can, the best time to protect yourself is right before it gets really out of control. Immediately begin to create an aura of light around you. And if it's coming from another person, an aura of light around that other person. But we do need to protect our energy field from the negativity around us.
Even when we are successful at holding steady our inner peace during others' turbulent outbreaks, oftentimes people are not receptive to that peace in the moment. What are some effective ways of helping to pacify the angry and frustrated when they might not have any conception of God or meditation? There's a very important principle, which is the fact that positive opposites tend to neutralize the negative. And so if somebody is angry around you, maybe not angry at you, but angry around you, be especially calm and loving during that time. And you don't have to make a big point of it, just do it kind of quietly. You create a magnetic aura that counterbalances that negativity that you're trying to in some cases protect yourself from, in some cases try to change others. Often it's better to work non-verbally if somebody is, I don't know, resistant, put it that way. The great violin teacher Suzuki, who started the Suzuki method, they adopted a boy after World War II, an orphan, who they had a very refined house. And this boy was very unruly and rude and really upset the household. And finally, his wife and children came to him and said, "We've got to do something. We can't stand this." He said, "You're absolutely right. We have to act on it. We cannot be passive. We must increase our own calmness and refinement, and that will help him change." So, whatever you're reacting to, find the opposite, increase that quality in yourself, and that will help the situation as much as it's going to be helped.
And the last question, then we'll have our singers ending, so don't leave just yet. They'll sing two of Swami Kriyananda's song. And this is a very easy question. What was your favorite blog that you wrote during the height of the pandemic or this last year? All of them. Everyone is a source of joy, and we cherish each one because we try to give it to you as a channel for receiving it as we're giving it to God. So thank you for being with us tonight. And now we'll close with our wonderful joy singers.
I'll just add.
However many. Whatever. Only one song?
Yeah.
One song. Sorry.
Yeah. And I'll just add, that's an unfair question. What is your favorite blog? It's like saying, who is your favorite child? So we love all of them.
Who they like? Which blog they like? You can write.
And which blog did you like?
Yeah, what was good? Good. Yeah, what was your favorite blog?
Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby. Amen. Peace gave us the morning, peace gave us the sun, bird songs that call us to welcome day and fresh labors begun. Amen. Peace gave us the seasons, peace gave us the rain, cool clouds that gather to bless us, mist hands that soothe away pain. Amen. Amen.
Peace give us our heart's love. Peace give us our smiles. Praise of God's presence within us. Light that all strife reconciles. Amen.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and singing tonight. You didn't have to, but it sure made
It's our
it.
joy.
It's our pleasure. It's our...
And you guys, thanks for coming.
So we'll finish with I Live Without Fear.
Though green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend.
Thank you for joining us.